Emma couldn't take her eyes off him. Across the crowded wedding reception, the tall man with the warm smile kept drawing her attention. She hadn't planned on meeting anyone special today. As her friend's bridesmaid, she was focused on making sure everything went perfectly. But something about him seemed different. James noticed her too. The woman in the lavender dress who moved with such grace among the guests. He'd come to the wedding reluctantly only because the groom was his college roommate. Social gatherings weren't his favorite, but he found himself grateful he'd made an exception today. Their eyes met across the room during the first dance. Emma quickly looked away, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. James smiled to himself. When the music changed to something more upbeat and guests filled the dance floor, he decided to make his move. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, appearing suddenly at her side. Emma looked up, surprised to find him standing there. "I'm supposed to be helping with the cake soon," she said, though her eyes betrayed her interest. "Just one dance," James said, extending his hand. "I promise I'll have you back before cake duty." Something about his gentle confidence made Emma take his hand. On the dance floor, they moved together naturally, as if they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. "I'm James, by the way." "Emma," she replied. "How do you know the couple?" "Tom and I were roommates in college. He's the only reason I'm wearing a tie today," James said with a laugh. "And you?" "Lisa and I have been friends since we were kids. I'm her bridesmaid, which means I'm basically at her service all day." As they danced, time seemed to slow down. They talked about simple things, where they grew up, their jobs, favorite foods. Emma told him about her art studio where she painted and taught classes to children. James explained his work as an engineer, designing bridges that were both beautiful and safe. "So you're both practical and creative," Emma observed. "I try to be. Though I'm much more practical," James admitted. "What about you? All creative, or is there a practical side too?" "I balance the books for my studio, but I definitely lean toward the creative side," she said with a smile. The music changed to a slower song. They paused, both suddenly aware of the choice before them, separate or move closer. James hesitated, not wanting to presume. Emma made the decision for them both, stepping slightly closer and placing her hand on his shoulder. As they swayed to the music, Emma noticed details about him, the faint scent of his cologne, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how carefully he held her, close but respectful. "I don't usually do this," James said quietly. "Dance at weddings?" Emma teased. "Meet someone who makes me forget everyone else in the room." The honesty in his voice made her heart beat faster. Before she could respond, the wedding planner appeared at her elbow, reminding her about the cake. "Duty calls," Emma said with genuine regret. "Can I see you again?" James asked as she started to move away. "Maybe dinner next weekend?" Emma hesitated only briefly. This wasn't like her, she usually took time getting to know someone. But something felt right about James, something she couldn't explain but didn't want to ignore. "I'd like that," she said, pulling a small notebook from her purse. She quickly wrote down her number and handed it to him. Their fingers touched during the exchange, sending a small thrill through them both. As Emma walked away to help with the cake, she glanced back once to find James still watching her, a smile on his face. Later, as guests began leaving and Emma helped gather gifts, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The best part of this wedding was meeting you. Looking forward to dinner, James." Emma smiled to herself, typing a quick reply. As she looked up, she caught Lisa's knowing glance from across the room. Her friend raised an eyebrow in silent question, and Emma just shrugged with a smile. Something had begun today, something unexpected and full of potential. She didn't know where it might lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to find out. 3 months passed like a dream for Emma and James. Their first date led to a second, then a third, and soon they were spending nearly every free moment together. The differences in their personalities that might have created distance instead brought them closer, each finding in the other something they hadn't known they were missing. On weekends, James joined Emma at her art studio, watching with fascination as she transformed blank canvases into vibrant landscapes. Though he claimed to have no artistic talent, Emma convinced him to try painting alongside her one rainy Sunday afternoon. His careful, precise brushstrokes made her smile. Even in art, his engineer's mind sought structure and balance. "You're laughing at me," he said, noticing her expression as he meticulously mixed colors. "I'm not laughing," Emma replied, moving behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "I'm admiring how you approach everything with such thought." James turned in her embrace, brushing paint-smudged fingers lightly against her cheek. "And I admire how you dive in without fear." The kiss that followed left them both breathless, the painting forgotten. Their physical connection had developed as naturally as everything else between them. The first time they made love had been unplanned. What began as a goodnight kiss after dinner at his apartment deepened into something more urgent, more necessary. James had pulled back, asking with his eyes if she was certain. Emma's answer was to lead him to the bedroom. Now, as autumn turned the world golden around them, they discovered each other more fully with each passing day. Emma loved the gentle strength in James's hands, how he could be both tender and passionate. James found himself entranced by Emma's uninhibited responses to his touch, how she showed him exactly what she wanted without hesitation or shame. One evening, after a dinner with friends where everyone had commented on how perfect they seemed together, they walked hand in hand through the park near Emma's apartment. The night air held the first real chill of the season, and Emma pressed closer to James's side for warmth. "Move in with me," he said suddenly, stopping beneath the streetlight. Emma looked up at him, searching his face. "Are you sure? We've only been together for 3 months." James took both her hands in his. "I've never been more sure of anything. I love waking up next to you. I love falling asleep with you in my arms. The days you're not with me feel incomplete." Emma felt her heart race. She'd been thinking the same things but hadn't wanted to rush what they were building. "Your place or mine?" she asked, her smile giving him the answer he hoped for. They chose his apartment, which was larger and closer to both their workplaces. The following weekend, James helped Emma move her essential belongings, both of them laughing as they tried to find space for her art supplies among his orderly possessions. That night, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, they christened their now-shared home. James carried Emma to bed, undressing her slowly, his lips following the path of each piece of clothing as it fell away. Emma responded by pulling him closer, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of his body with new significance. This was different somehow, deeper, more meaningful. Later, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, Emma resting her head on James's chest, she listened to his heartbeat and felt a sense of rightness wash over her. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that first dance," she admitted softly. James's arms tightened around her. "I know I have been," he whispered against her hair. In the following weeks, they settled into a rhythm of shared life. They learned each other's habits, how James couldn't start his day without coffee, how Emma liked to sleep with the window cracked open even as winter approached. They discovered that James was the better cook, while Emma had a talent for making any space feel like home. Some evenings they barely made it through the door before reaching for each other, clothes discarded in a trail to the bedroom. Other nights they simply held each other close, talking about their days, their dreams, the future that seemed to be unfolding before them with such promise. Neither said it aloud yet, but both began to imagine that future extending far beyond these first passionate months. When Emma caught James looking at her with such tenderness as she painted on a Sunday morning, or when James noticed how perfectly Emma fit against him as they slept, the same thought occurred to them both: this could be forever. 6 months into living together, Emma and James had created a home that reflected both of them perfectly. His sleek, modern furniture now shared space with her colorful artwork. The living room bookshelf displayed his engineering texts alongside her art books. Each corner of the apartment told the story of their growing relationship. On a crisp Saturday morning, Emma woke before James. She watched him sleep, admiring the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyelashes rested against his cheeks. A rush of emotion filled her chest. She'd never felt this way before. Like she'd found her place in the world, not just in a physical space but in a person. James stirred, opening his eyes to find her watching him. "Good morning," he murmured, pulling her closer. "How long have you been awake?" "Not long," Emma replied, settling against his chest. "I was just thinking how happy I am." His hand moved slowly up and down her back, a gentle caress that still sent shivers through her body after all these months. "Me too," he said simply. They stayed in bed longer than planned, their bodies finding each other with the familiar rhythm they'd perfected. Emma loved how James knew exactly where to touch her, how to build her pleasure slowly until she called out his name. For his part, James remained amazed at the intensity of their connection, how Emma responded to him with complete openness. Later, as they shared breakfast at the small kitchen table, James brought up something he'd been thinking about. "My lease is up in 2 months," he said casually. "I was thinking maybe we should look for a new place together, something we choose as a couple." Emma set down her coffee cup. "You mean buy something? We could rent first, but eventually, yes, I've been thinking about buying." He reached for her hand. "I want to build something permanent with you, Emma." The weight of his words hung between them. This wasn't just about an apartment, it was about commitment, about seeing their futures intertwined. "I'd like that," she said finally, her voice soft but certain. "I want that too." They spent the afternoon looking at apartment listings online, discussing neighborhoods and features they each wanted. James wanted something with good natural light for Emma's painting. Emma insisted on a space where James could set up a proper home office instead of working at the kitchen table when he brought projects home. As evening approached, they decided to celebrate their decision. James opened a bottle of wine while Emma prepared dinner. The simple domesticity of the moment struck them both. How natural it felt to build this life together. After dinner, they moved to the couch, the wine making them both relaxed and affectionate. James pulled Emma onto his lap, her legs straddling his. What began as gentle kisses soon deepened as his hands slipped beneath her shirt, finding bare skin. "I love you," he whispered against her neck. "I've never been so sure about anyone." Emma guided his face back to hers, kissing him deeply as she began to move against him. "Show me," she breathed. They made love there on the couch, more urgently than they had that morning. Emma's hands gripped James's shoulders as she moved above him, his hands on her hips guiding her rhythm. When they finished, breathless and satisfied, they stayed connected, foreheads touching. Later that night, lying in bed, they talked about other aspects of their future. The conversation drifted naturally to the topic of family. "Do you want children someday?" James asked, tracing patterns on Emma's bare shoulder. She considered the question carefully. "I think I do. Not right away, but yes, eventually. What about you?" "I do," Lee answered. "I never thought much about it before meeting you. But now I can picture it, a little girl with your eyes, maybe a boy with your artistic talent." Emma smiled at the image. "Or a girl with your analytical mind, or a boy who builds towers out of blocks with engineering precision." They didn't make definite plans that night, but the conversation opened a door to possibilities. Neither felt rushed, they had time to grow together before taking that step. As they drifted toward sleep, Emma nestled against James, his arms secure around her waist. The commitment they'd made that day wasn't marked by a ring or a ceremony, but it felt significant nonetheless. They were choosing each other, day after day, building a foundation for whatever came next. James pressed a kiss to Emma's hair as sleep claimed her. In the quiet darkness, he allowed himself to imagine their future unfolding. A new home, perhaps children someday, and always, always Emma by his side. It was everything he hadn't known he wanted until he met her, and now he couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Emma stared at the small plastic stick in her hand, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. 2 pink lines. She checked the box again to be certain, though she already knew what it meant. Pregnant. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub, her legs suddenly weak. They had been careful, or so she thought. Her mind raced back through the past few months, trying to pinpoint when it might have happened. Perhaps that weekend at the beach house they'd rented to celebrate their 1-year anniversary. They had been so caught up in each other, so lost in passion that perhaps caution had been forgotten in those heated moments. Emma placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. A baby, their baby. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. She and James had talked about children as something for the future, a distant future after they'd bought a home, after her art studio had become more established, after James had secured the promotion he was working toward. They had just signed a lease on a new apartment, one they had chosen together. It was perfect for the two of them, but a baby? Emma tried to imagine a crib in the second bedroom they had planned to use as a shared office space. The sound of keys in the front door made her jump. James was home early. Emma quickly wrapped the pregnancy test in tissue and tucked it into her pocket. She needed time to process this before telling him. "Emma, James called out. "Where are you?" She splashed cold water on her face and took a deep breath before opening the bathroom door. "Here," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. James appeared in the hallway, his smile warm as he pulled her into his arms. "I missed you today," he murmured against her hair before kissing her deeply. Emma melted into his embrace, seeking comfort in the familiar strength of his body against hers. For a moment, she considered telling him immediately, but fear held the words back. What if he wasn't ready? What if this changed everything between them? That evening, Emma found it impossible to concentrate. While James talked about his day at work, she nodded and smiled at what she hoped were appropriate moments, but her mind remained fixed on the secret growing inside her. As they prepared for bed, James noticed her distraction. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice as he sat beside her on their bed. "I'm just tired," Emma lied, avoiding his eyes. James gently turned her face toward his. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The tenderness in his gaze nearly undid her. Emma felt tears welling up. How could she keep this from him, even for a night? This wasn't just about her. It was about them, about the life they had created together. "James," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found out something today." His expression grew serious, a flicker of worry crossing his features. "What is it, love?" Emma reached into her nightstand drawer where she had hidden the pregnancy test earlier. With trembling hands, she held it out to him. "I'm pregnant." James stared at the test, his expression unreadable for what felt to Emma like an eternity. Then slowly his eyes met hers, and she saw in them a mixture of shock, wonder, and something else, something that made her heart lighten. "We're having a baby?" His voice was hushed, almost reverent. Emma nodded, tears now flowing freely. "I know it's sooner than we planned. I know there's never a perfect time, but—" Her words were cut off as James pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were suddenly fragile and infinitely precious. "Emma," he breathed against her hair. "A baby. Our baby." When he pulled back, Emma was surprised to see tears in his eyes too. "Are you happy about this?" she asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," James said, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "I'm terrified and amazed and completely in love with you both already." Relief washed over Emma in a powerful wave. She hadn't realized how afraid she'd been of his reaction until that moment. James gathered her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't: his love, his commitment, his wonder at the new life they had created. That night, their lovemaking took on a new dimension. James touched her with reverent gentleness, his hands lingering over her stomach, as if he could already feel the changes happening within her. Emma responded with a depth of emotion that surprised them both, her body hypersensitive to his every touch. As they lay together afterward, James's hand protectively cradling her abdomen, Emma felt a profound sense of peace replace her earlier anxiety. They hadn't planned this, but somehow it felt right. They would figure out the details together, as they had with everything else. "I love you," James whispered in the darkness. "Both of you." Emma smiled, placing her hand over his. "We love you too." The weeks following Emma's revelation passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, late-night talks, and cautious planning. Though initial shock had given way to excitement, both Emma and James found themselves confronting deeper fears about their readiness for parenthood. One evening, as summer heat lingered outside their windows, they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by budget spreadsheets. James ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Emma recognized as his response to stress. "We'll need to adjust our timeline for buying a house," he said, staring at the numbers. "The apartment will work for now, but with the baby coming in winter." Emma reached across the table and took his hand. "Are you worried about the money or something else?" James looked up, his eyes revealing vulnerability he rarely showed. "Both, I guess. I always thought I'd be more established in my career before becoming a father. My own dad was so confident, so sure about everything. I don't feel that way at all." "You think I feel ready?" Emma squeezed his hand. "Yesterday I caught myself wondering if I'll have to give up painting completely. What if I can't balance being an artist and a mother?" Something shifted in James' expression as he stood and moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. "You won't give up painting. We'll figure it out together." His hand came to rest on the small swell of her belly, now just becoming visible. I may not feel ready, but I know I want this with you. Emma felt tears threatening. Pregnancy hormones had made her emotions unpredictable. She leaned down to kiss him, a kiss that quickly deepened as James pulled her gently from the chair into his lap on the kitchen floor. Right here? Emma laughed against his mouth, already feeling desire building. Why not? James murmured, his hands sliding under her loose shirt to caress the changing curves of her body. The doctor said it's perfectly safe. They had been hesitant at first, treating her as if she might break. But their need for each other had only grown stronger with the pregnancy. Emma straddled him now, removing her shirt with newfound confidence in her changing body. James watched her with undisguised admiration. You're even more beautiful, he whispered, hands tracing the fuller curves of her breasts, now sensitive to his lightest touch. Emma closed her eyes, losing herself in sensation as James's mouth replaced his hands. They moved together there on the kitchen floor, budget worries forgotten in the heat between them. When Emma cried out, back arching as pleasure coursed through her, James held her close, whispering words of love against her skin. Later, they moved to the bedroom, where James pulled Emma close against him, one arm protectively draped over her growing belly. What if I'm terrible at this? Emma asked suddenly, voicing the fear that had been lurking beneath her other concerns. What if I don't know how to be a good mother? James was quiet for a moment. I think the fact that you're worried about it means you won't be terrible, he said finally. We'll make mistakes. All parents do. But we'll learn together. The conversation turned to practical matters, whether to find out the baby's sex, how to rearrange the apartment, when to tell their employers. Each decision felt monumental, yet somehow manageable when shared. The following weekend, they visited Emma's parents to share the news in person. Her mother cried happy tears while her father shook James's hand with newfound respect. James's parents, when told over video call that evening, responded with similar joy, though James later admitted to Emma that his father had expressed concern about their unmarried status. Does that bother you? Emma asked, suddenly self-conscious about the traditional path they weren't following. James considered the question seriously. I want to marry you, Emma. I've known that for months. But I don't want you to think I'm only asking because of the baby. Emma traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. I know you better than that. That night, as moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, they talked more honestly than ever before about their future, not just the practical aspects of parenthood, but their dreams, fears, and hopes for the family they were creating. Whatever happens, James whispered as they drifted toward sleep, his body curled protectively around hers, we face it together. The three of us. Emma smiled in the darkness, feeling the first fluttering movements of their child within her. For all their fears and uncertainties, this felt right. This new life they were building, unexpected but increasingly precious with each passing day. As Emma entered her 7th month of pregnancy, summer faded into autumn, painting the world outside their apartment windows in rich golds and reds. Her body had changed dramatically now, her once flat stomach a prominent curve that made strangers smile at her in the street. James found himself fascinated by these changes, his hands drawn to the swell of her belly where their child grew stronger each day. One evening, as Emma sat on the couch with her feet propped up on pillows, James knelt before her to massage her swollen ankles. The simple intimacy of the moment caught Emma by surprise, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. What's wrong? James asked, immediately concerned. Emma smiled through her tears. Nothing. Everything. I just love you so much it hurts sometimes. James leaned forward to kiss her gently. I love you too. Both of you. His hand moved to her stomach, and as if on cue, the baby kicked against his palm. The wonder on his face made Emma's heart swell. These moments had become precious to them both, the tangible evidence of the life they'd created together. Later that night, sleep eluded Emma. The baby was particularly active, tiny feet and elbows shifting restlessly beneath her skin. She carefully extracted herself from James's embrace and padded to the nursery they had finished, setting up the previous weekend. The small room had once been their shared office, but now it held a white crib, a comfortable rocking chair, and walls Emma had painted herself with a mural of a gentle forest scene. She sat in the rocking chair, hands cradling her belly, and whispered to her unborn child about the world waiting outside. James found her there an hour later, framed in moonlight from the window. Without speaking, he knelt beside the chair and rested his head against her stomach, listening to the movements within. Emma ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by love for this man who had embraced fatherhood with such wholehearted commitment. "Come back to bed," James whispered eventually, helping her to her feet. "You need to rest." In their bedroom, he helped her find a comfortable position, arranging pillows to support her back and belly. As she settled, Emma felt a familiar warmth building inside her. The physical changes of pregnancy had altered their lovemaking, but had not diminished their desire for each other. If anything, James seemed to find her changing body even more alluring, his touch reverent yet passionate. "Is this okay?" he asked, his hand sliding beneath her nightgown to caress her thigh. Emma answered by guiding his hand higher, gasping softly as his fingers found her most sensitive spots. They had discovered new ways to please each other these past months, adapting to her changing needs and limitations. James took his time now, using his hands and mouth to bring her to the edge repeatedly before finally allowing her release. Emma clutched at his shoulders, crying out his name as waves of pleasure washed over her. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, the baby kicked again, making them both laugh. "I think someone's protesting," James said, placing a gentle kiss on Emma's stomach. "Or approving," Emma replied with a smile. "We're giving this child a home built on love. That can only be good." The following weekend brought a surprise baby shower organized by Emma's friends from the art studio. Their apartment filled with laughter, gifts, and well wishes. Emma watched as James good-naturedly endured teasing from her friends, his easy smile never faltering as he helped serve food and unwrap presents. Later, after the last guest had departed, they sat surrounded by tiny clothes, blankets, and practical items they hadn't known they needed. Emma leaned against James on the couch, physically exhausted but emotionally buoyant. "We're really doing this," she said, looking at the evidence of their baby's impending arrival scattered around the living room. "We really are," James agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Scared?" "Terrified," Emma admitted. "But in a good way. Like standing at the edge of something amazing." James nodded, understanding perfectly. "I had a talk with my dad last week. He told me that no one ever feels completely ready. You just do your best every day." "Your dad said that?" "I thought he had everything figured out." James laughed. Apparently it was all an act. He was making it up as he went along too. This revelation brought Emma comfort. Perhaps everyone was simply doing their best, learning as they went. She and James would be no different. As night fell, they sorted through the gifts together, imagining the tiny person who would soon wear these clothes, sleep beneath these blankets. When Emma's hands slowed, her exhaustion evident, James insisted she rest while he finished organizing. The first snowfall of winter dusted the city on the night Emma went into labor. It began as a dull ache in her lower back while they finished dinner, growing steadily more intense until there was no denying what was happening. James moved with surprising calm, gathering the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago, helping Emma into her coat, and calling their doctor. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of contractions and quiet reassurances. James held Emma's hand at every red light, his voice steady as he reminded her to breathe. Despite the pain building inside her, Emma felt a strange sense of peace. They were ready for this moment, as ready as they could be. In the delivery room, time lost all meaning. Emma focused on James's face, on the strength of his hand in hers, on his voice guiding her through each contraction. When the pain threatened to overwhelm her, he was there, wiping her forehead, telling her how amazing she was, how strong. "I can't do this," Emma gasped after a particularly intense contraction. "You are doing it," James whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. "You're the most incredible woman I've ever known. Our baby is almost here because of you." Those words gave her the strength to continue. With a final, tremendous effort, their daughter entered the world, tiny, red-faced, and perfect in every way. The sound of her first cry filled the room, and Emma burst into tears of joy and exhaustion. The doctor placed the baby on Emma's chest, and James leaned in close, one arm around Emma's shoulders, the other hand gently touching their daughter's head. In that moment, the three of them connected in a way that transcended words. "She's beautiful," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. just like her mother. Later, in the quiet of their hospital room, Emma watched as James held their daughter for the first time. His strong hands, which had guided architectural projects and loved Emma's body so thoroughly, now cradled this tiny being with infinite tenderness. The expression on his face, wonder mixed with fierce protection, made Emma fall in love with him all over again. "I never knew I could feel this way," James said softly, not taking his eyes off the sleeping infant. "It's like my heart is outside my body now, walking around in her." Emma understood exactly what he meant. Their love, which had seemed so complete before, had expanded to include this perfect creation, different from yet connected to the love they shared with each other. The first weeks at home passed in a haze of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and moments of pure magic. They took turns walking the floor with their daughter in the early morning hours, both learning the rhythms of this new life they'd created. One night, after finally getting the baby to sleep, Emma found James standing over the crib, simply watching their daughter breathe. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "I don't want to miss a moment," he whispered. "Even when I'm exhausted, I don't want to close my eyes." Emma understood this too, the fierce desire to witness every second of their daughter's life, balanced against the bone-deep exhaustion of new parenthood. When they finally made it to bed that night, James gathered Emma close, careful of her still healing body. Though the doctor had advised waiting a few more weeks before resuming physical intimacy, there was comfort in the simple closeness of skin against skin. "Thank you," James murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For her. For us. For everything." Emma turned in his arms to face him. In the dim light, she could see tears glistening in his eyes. She kissed him softly, pouring all her love into the gentle connection. As weeks turned into months, they gradually found their rhythm as a family. Emma began painting again, setting up a small corner of the living room as a studio where she could work while keeping an eye on the baby. James adjusted his work schedule to be home more, often arriving with dinner in hand on days when Emma was particularly exhausted. On their daughter's 3-month birthday, James surprised Emma with a small velvet box after they'd put the baby to bed. Inside was a delicate ring with a single diamond. "This isn't because of her," he said, taking Emma's hand, "though she's made me even more certain. I want to spend my life with you, build our family together, grow old watching our children grow up. Will you marry me?" Emma's answer was a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. As she melted into his embrace, their daughter's soft sounds coming through the baby monitor beside their bed, Emma knew with absolute certainty that their unexpected blessing had led them exactly where they were meant to be. That night, as they made love for the first time since the birth, slowly, tenderly, rediscovering each other's bodies, their connection felt even deeper than before. They were no longer just lovers or partners but family, bound together by the most profound love either had ever known.